Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our special event, Immigration and Social Justice, organized by Archer, American Romanian Coalition for Human and Equal Rights. I'm Mihaela Campion, one of the founders, and I have the pleasure and honor to introduce our guest speakers today. Dana Roxana Bucin, J.D., immigration attorney with a business corporate legal background, and also honorary attorney with of Romania, honorary counsel of Romania, honorary counsel of Romania in Connecticut. Welcome, Dana.
Thank you,
Happy to
Mihaela.
have you here today with us.
Happy to be here.
Rebecca Fritz, licensed clinical social worker and JD with over 20 years of clinical experience in psychiatric and substance abuse facilities. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And Razvan Sibii, doctor in communication and also professor of journalism and honors at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Welcome, Razvan.
Thank you.
Very happy to have you here today.
Thank you.
Because our guest speakers have exceptional expertise in their fields, I highly recommend everyone to check their bios in our event description and familiarize yourself with their expertise. I think it would take a long time for us to go over their experiences and backgrounds, so I highly encourage you to do so. And also, I would like to let you know what we are planning to do here today. So we have a full agenda of several topics of great importance related to immigration and social justice. We attempt to go over all of them, but if you have questions and comments, we would like you to go to the page to, when you watch the video, to go into the comments section and list them there. We are planning to leave about 10-15 minutes if needed for Q&A at the end, and go over your questions and comments as much as we have time to do so. Okay, and I think we are ready to start. And I would like to start with, very important question that it's ardent these days, right? It's something that everybody is talking about. Why, some people could come to the United States, were allowed into the country, and others couldn't or can't at the moment. So pretty much, the question of, or the comment saying that, well, my grandfather came through Ellis Island legally, and the people who are crossing the border illegally now are not exactly the same. Who wants to start? I would like to hear from all of you.
I think sure.
Razvan.
So I hear this a lot. I hear it when I teach on immigration. I hear the question when I interview immigrants for my journalism pieces. And the question is, if my grandfather came through Ellis Island in the early 1900s and he came legally, why can't these people be doing the same thing? They're not like my grandfather. My grandfather had respect for the law, and he was willing to work hard and fulfill the American dream. And the answer there is, your grandfather's respect for the law amounted to getting a ticket on a boat from Europe to get to Ellis Island. He did not apply for a visa. There was no such thing. He just came, just like everybody else. He came, and when he got to Ellis Island, the rejection rate at the time in the early 1900s for immigrants coming through from Europe, coming through Ellis Ellis Island was 2%. So your grandfather stood a 98% chance of making it into the United States simply because he was able to save enough money to buy a ticket third class on a boat to cross the Atlantic and arrive in New York City. That was it. That was the sum total of your grandfather's concern for American laws or norms, right? He came. Now, the people who are coming in now, they're no different. They are motivated by the same reasons your grandfather was motivated. The poverty is the same, the violence is the same, the wish, the hope to build a better future for your kids is the same. What has changed is us, is the laws that await them once they come here. Why can't they get in line like everybody else? You hear that from Romanian immigrants to the United States and other immigrants to the United States. Why can't they get in line? And the answer is simple, because there is no line. There is no line. If you're a Mexican who does not have a relative living in the United States on a legal visa or green card or citizenship, and you would like to come to the United States and you apply to immigrate into the United States, it would take you up to 25 years to have your case even be adjudicated. And then most likely it will be adjudicated as you can't come. When your life is in danger, when your kid's life is in danger, when your daughter has been told that either she becomes the girlfriend of some gangbanger, or your son has been told that either he joins the gang or ugly things will happen, you don't have 25 years to wait to get to the US, right? Your grandfather picked up his stuff and got on a boat. These people pick up their stuff and cross the border if they have to. That's it. That's the only difference. They're not different. The only difference is us.
Yeah.
Great point.
Yes. May I jump in here? Because I also want to add to that excellent point. First of all, I'm just very proud that we have the name Romanian in Archer, because that shows how Romanian Americans do care about social justice and fairness, especially to immigrants, because Romanian Americans are immigrants. And second, I just want to state even more pertinent legal angles as to the issue, why it was so much easier to immigrate a long time ago than it is right now. We don't even have to look that much in the past. We just have to look in the 1980s. In the 1980s, as countries from Eastern Europe, for example, who were behind the Iron Curtain, they had access to a refugee visa number that was as large as 200,000 refugee spots available during the Reagan administration. 200,000. Compare that to the 18,000 refugee spots per year available today, of which we haven't even filled half of that currently for this year. So when you compare the availability of visas and availability of asylee spots, you could see that there were times in our past that it was much easier to come to this country. Another recent policy that is blocking asylum seekers, attempts to block asylum seekers from soliciting asylum in the United States if they transition through a third country. Let's just remember, at least for Romanian Americans, the case of Nadia Comaneci, who had to transition through several countries until she got to Vienna. And from Vienna, she got to solicit asylum into the United States. To get there, she had to cross Yugoslavia and Hungary and Austria. And so she would be disqualified under today's rules. Just another example of how much harder it is today to come here legally. Another obstacle to legal immigration is the anachronistic visa number systems we have for visas such as H-1Bs. In the 1980s, we had established 65,000, later raised to 85,000 H-1B visas per year. That's from the 1980s. Today is 2020, so we have a much more modern economy that has much bigger need for those types of visas, yet we have not updated our legislation to match modern demand for skilled immigration. Yet another reason why it's so hard to come here legally. Staying in line, just like Razvan stated, there are decades that people have to wait in that line because of the number of visas per year that we have agreed to a long time ago and we haven't revised. Not to mention current policies that block even the existing numbers. Even the anachronistic numbers that we have today are further blocked by executive actions and proclamations that ban immigrants from coming in through consulate during COVID-19. Not to mention, again, the mercilessness of laws that treat you as being illegal the moment your status has fallen sideways, just for a simple clerical mistake. You sent in the package, it was never received, or you sent it in, it was denied for the wrong reasons, and now you're here illegally. There's no way to go back on track once you've fallen off track. So we have these folks that have been undocumented for a while just because they once fell off the wagon. And so I just wanted to give a perspective for why don't they come here legally. And that has come up in the media accounts, at least here in Connecticut. We've had plenty of cases where folks have been rallying to save from deportation folks who have been here for 20 plus years in undocumented status. And so you see these comments online, 20 years, why didn't they become citizens? They must not have wanted to become citizens. That's why they're getting deported. And that's not true. We just do not have the legal system that's needed to legalize these people who have been here for 20 plus years. So what's wrong is that we're dealing with an anachronistic system of laws that needs reform. And unfortunately, we're using this anachronistic system of law against folks. We're using it affirmatively to detain and deport them, and definitely not to accept new ones. So what is needed right now is a reform of the system.
And that was exactly my next question, if we need a reform, and then if we do, how that reform would look like in terms of fairness.
I would love to take that question unless Rebecca wants to jump into the previous ones first.
I would love to follow up your answer with why it might be difficult to get to that reform. So if you wouldn't mind going forward with the reform.
Yes, absolutely. So I am very, very keen on the idea of immigration reform. My approach has been to think of it as a bipartisan reform, because it turns out that 75+% of the American public is in favor of some sort of immigration reform. So when you have so many Americans agree to reform the system, there's got to be a way, right? And so I'm going to talk from the angle of how a bipartisan immigration reform could look like. To tackle the concerns from both the left and the right. And so one of the first things that we need to reform is making sure that we have a well-functioning legal immigration system. We just talked about the scarcity of visa numbers, about visa numbers established back in the 1980s and that are now used for the 2020 economy, and that's not adequate. So we have to increase the visa numbers and make it responsive to the market demands for labor and market supply, because you want to provide enough visas for American employers to recruit their foreign labor at prevailing wages. Basically, that's the number of optimal visas. Then you want enough startup visas for entrepreneurs. I am very big on this. It's the entrepreneurial spirit of the immigrant that has built this country up, and it should continue to build, to contribute to its further development. So I would insist on creating a startup visa specifically for folks who are coming here with brilliant ideas, but they lack the capital to make them happen. However, they would find the capital here. Then obviously I mentioned the prevailing wage. That's just the code name for making sure that both the workers are paid a fair wage and American workers are protected in that they're not competing against cheaper foreign labor. Obviously, we need more family preference visa available because we don't want the Mexican brother of a US citizen to wait 25 years in line. That's just not good. You know, we have to make more visas available. Then I would establish a humane asylum and refugee system that will honor our values at the same time as providing security, right? Because we want to make sure that everybody is well vetted. And by the way, even right now, we have a very well vetted system of refugee and asylee admission. It takes 2 to 3 years to vet someone. I know because I have cases of folks who are waiting online just for the background check to come in, and they're in danger and their life is in danger, but they have to wait the 3 years that it takes for the system to go through all the background checks. I would definitely explore processing asylum cases overseas at consulates. That's no longer the case now. It used to be the case during the Nadia Comaneci days. For some reason, they cut off that, ability. But I would go back to the old system of camps and consulates, so people don't crash at our border, so that they have an elegant, well-vetted, well-screened way of soliciting asylum in this country. I would also reform the system to commit to proportionality, accountability, and due process in immigration proceedings. Right now, we have an immigration court that is in charge of deciding who is here legally and who can be legalized and who needs to be deported. That immigration court is not independent. It's under our head prosecutor, the Attorney General of the United States. That's not independent. So we need to ensure that the immigration courts are independent. Evidently, with a concern for due process, because right now they're incentivized to deport more people rather than give them the due process that they deserve. I would definitely search for a way to create a path for the undocumented who have been here for a long time. They are not criminal. They haven't been convicted of any crimes. They make an effort to speak English and adapt to this society. They've paid their taxes and worked hard. All these people need to come up to the light and legalize and participate in society. And yes, as a concession to bipartisanship, there needs to be some basic agreement on border security that is humane, effective, high-tech, and fit for the 21st century. And that's basically, in a nutshell, what I would look in an immigration reform.
Wow. It's very comprehensive. I wish they would consult with you, Dana, for sure. Razvan, do you have anything to add? I was wondering, in your expertise, I would like to hear more about why do you believe not all undocumented immigrants need to be deported?
Yeah, I do have lots to say about that, but I wanna ask Rebecca if she wanted to follow up on Dana's comments.
Sure, I can. And I think this might segue in an interesting way to your upcoming comments. I'd be interested to hear what you think, because this is a little bit of a departure from the legal. This is more the idea of, okay, how do we get to be, to come from this country where immigrants are welcomed and they're needed and necessary, to this country that is starting to limit numbers and has these differing views on immigrants. And a frame that works for me that I'd like to share with you today And most therapists share this with clients as well. I think it's very commonly used. It's called the Cartman drama triangle. So this I know it sounds like it doesn't quite fit in this conversation, but it does, and I'll explain to you why. This Cartman drama triangle started in 1968, right? Dr. Stephen Cartman, he was studying transactional analysis under a psychiatrist. Transactional analysis just means that psychiatrists were learning to look at what their clients do, how they interact with others, to learn more insights into their clients' behavior. This is a little bit different from Freudian psychology, where it was a lot of talk therapy. So now we're starting to look at behaviors and what people do. So behind that, Stephen Cartman decided, okay, he had an interest in acting, right? He went to drama school, so he knew that was going on. He was also a doctor and studying to be a psychiatrist at Duke University, right? So all of this was coming together, and he realized that these interactions that people are having, some of them can be a little bit conflict-based. When there was conflict or dysfunction, he saw this triangle appearing. And through reviews of different media, including movies, specifically for him, Valley of the Dolls, I haven't seen it. I know it's popular. A lot of people have seen it. He realized that this triangle was occurring that involves persecutors, who are villains, right? Victims and rescuers, heroes. So you have these three types of interactions: persecutors, victims, heroes. And it kind of makes this internal system that perpetuates itself. So you'd say, okay, great. Well, what's an example of that? I'll use, thank you, Mihaela, for helping me be culturally sensitive in general. I have a wonderful example in terms of the goat and her 3 kids. So I don't know if everybody's familiar with this, excuse me, this fairy tale. In the US, they refer to Little Red Riding Hood as an example of this Cartman drama triangle, but I'll use the goat and her 3 kids. So in that story, the mama goat tells her kids, okay, look, behave, don't open the door, be good, I'll be right back. Well, not all of the kids are that good, right? So one is a little bit naughty, a little mischievous, and that one answers the door to the wolf, right? So the wolf is the big bad wolf coming in. The bad kid answers the door, he gets eaten. His brother gets eaten. The good kid who listened to his mother doesn't get eaten. So in this small example, you have a villain, right? The wolf, who's coming to be big and bad, the victim, the brothers who get eaten, and the hero, the good kid, or the mom who says, definitely be sure to not let the wolf in. So it's a very small example that gets translated not only into industry, but also to our overall culture. So for example, the US is obsessed with hero myths, the idea of Superman. It's not unique to the US for sure, but we really like it a lot here, with the villain being Lex Luthor, the victim being the citizens of Metropolis, and the hero being Superman. So we'll take it a step further, and in some areas of the US, immigrants are becoming villainized. They're stealing our jobs. They're bad people. They're coming in with rap sheets, which is not true, right? But this is part of the myth that's being fed. This is part of the dysfunctional triangle. Who's the victim in this case? The victim perceived are US citizens. And who's the hero? In this case, the hero is going to be the person who closes the border, who says how bad these people are. And I'm going to protect you, US citizens, from these bad people. And that's dysfunction at its finest. Another interesting feature of this triangle is that the roles can flip, right? The hero suddenly finds themselves being the persecutor. So the persecutor is letting these poor people who are struggling and who need safety to really kind of be in a bad way at the border. And then who becomes the hero? It's the people who are screaming, hey, we can't do this to these people. These people need our help. They deserve our support, right? So it's this continuing triangle that we see shifting and moving that makes it very difficult to get everyone on the same page, right? So it makes this power to be a little bit confused. And we really need to step out of this triangle and to think and evaluate for ourselves, especially through balanced reporting, right? That presents the whole picture. So we can understand what we can do as people, as citizens of the world to help each other. Not everyone has to be a hero. Not everyone has to be a victim. We can just be. And that's very difficult for most Americans to understand. They want a hero. And so if we want a hero, there has to be a victim and there has to be a persecutor. So stepping outside of that is a little bit tricky. And again, part of the key is balanced journalism. So Razvan, I'll turn it over to you.
That was great, Rebecca. Thank you for, inserting here our professional point of view perspective, which always helps. And I completely agree with you that in a triangle system, if we are part of the system, it's going to obstruct our view. And as much as we can step out and look at the system as an observer and not as a participant, we get a better idea and we become more equipped with what can be done in order to solve that constant interaction of that dysfunctional system. Razvan, the floor is yours.
We've most definitely seen the demonizing of immigrants in the past 4 years, like never before in my experience. This whole demonization of immigrants phenomenon is, in my observation, resting on several elements. There are those who agree with Trump's initial speech when he declared himself a candidate, when he was talking about how they come and rape our women. Mexico is not sending their best. Of course, Mexico is not sending immigrants. Immigrants aren't sent by anybody. They usually flee the country that they come from, quite the contrary. But and then he added as an afterthought, and some I assume are good people. So there's plenty who buy into the idea that immigrants are criminals, that those are the people who come here, the ones who are escaping the law in their countries, which is generally not true. And every single study that has been done on the criminality of immigrants, documented and undocumented, has come up with a figure that is lower than the criminality of natives, of native-born Americans. So no, in general, immigrants are not more criminal than native-born Americans, for obvious reasons. They don't want to be deported for the slightest infraction, right? Then there's another element of this image of the villain that is being attributed these days increasingly to immigrants, and that is the fact that they broke a law, right? If they're here undocumented, they must have broken the law. You're not allowed to be undocumented. And this has several answers. Number one, almost 50% of the undocumented immigrants in America right now have actually never crossed the border illegally. They overstayed their visas. And being without status, out of status in the United States, out of legal status, is not actually a crime. You can be deported, but it's not an actual crime in itself. You won't be prosecuted for having let your visa lapse. Most people don't know that. Imagine somebody on the corner of a street and they're legally there. They have every right to be there. But then a police officer comes and says, "Excuse me, sir, you have to move because construction workers are coming and they're gonna be doing something on this corner. You have to move." So the police officers is not telling that person, what you're doing right now is illegal, but they're saying you do have to obey my order because the situation will change. So when ICE says to an undocumented immigrant who has overstayed their visa, you have to leave, they have to leave legally. But the mere fact of being out of status in America is not yet breaking a law. They would break a law if they refuse to leave when they were instructed. So that's about almost half of the undocumented immigrants here have actually not broken a law, have broken some rules, civil rules, but have not actually, they're deportable, but not prosecutable. And when you're talking about criminals, somebody who hasn't committed a crime as defined by the US code cannot be a criminal, right? If we're talking ethics, then it's a whole different problem. Then the other half that have crossed the border illegally, there's only actually two little laws in the US code, and Dana can attest to this, sections 1325 and 1326 of the US criminal code, which do provide penalties for crossing the border and recrossing the border, respectively, illegally. Those were passed in 1929 at the behest of a South Carolina congressman who was unapologetically white supremacist, who did not hide that the purpose of that was to stop Latin American and primarily Mexican immigration into the United States. Those two statutes have been used very, very sparingly until George W. Bush in 9/11. After 9/11, given that most of the 9/11 terrorists were immigrants or were visitors to the United States, even though they were not undocumented, there was this push to do something about them foreigners who are killing us. And what they reached for any law that was on the books, and what they found was sections 1325 and 1326. The problem with those laws, which are still the only real laws that provide for criminal punishment for people who cross illegally, the problem is that they still define the crossing, a first-time border crosser who crosses the border illegally is guilty of a federal misdemeanor. A federal misdemeanor, that is a very small infraction. That is, other federal misdemeanors would be the use and transaction of pornography. So everybody who's been accessing Pornhub in the past, 40 years are guilty, theoretically, of a federal misdemeanor. Nobody gets prosecuted for that because no prosecutor will ever feel it's worth their time to go after pornography, even though theoretically it is illegal. Smoking marijuana, as we know, at the federal level is a federal misdemeanor. It's not legal, despite the fact that many states have made it legal. So yes, the Trump has the legal means to implement the zero tolerance measures that they have, and they can turn around and say, see, these people cross the border illegally, and we have laws against that, therefore they're criminals. But what they're not saying is that those laws are very, very bland and small and not often used until 9/11. And why is that? Why couldn't a Republican government, for example, a Republican Congress, which supposedly is not very open to increased immigration, why didn't they pass, when they controlled the entire Congress and the White House, why didn't they pass laws to make it a stronger law that puts people in prison for longer terms? And the answer to that is that even until Trump, even going through George W. Bush, the Republicans did not have such a strong animus against immigrants, including undocumented immigrants. If you watch old videos of Reagan talking about undocumented immigrants, it was very respectful. It was very sympathetic. Yes, he was arguing for better security at the border, but he was always sure to say, look, these are good people. These are hardworking people. We can't have people pouring into the country, but not because they're evil, but because the whole system is undermined and all of that. This whole talk of, demonizing immigrants that Rebecca was talking about, that was never the case, even with Republicans, right? Trump is not following in the footsteps of Republicans. His is a revolution that swept aside not just democratic ideas of immigration, fairness and immigration, but also Republican immigration, ideas of immigration. That's why we have such puny, small laws against undocumented immigrants. And that's why what usually happens, and Dana can attest to this, they catch an undocumented immigrant, They put them in prison under the zero tolerance policy. And then when they finally see a judge, as Dana said, who is not even an independent judge, is not part of the judiciary branch, is part of the executive branch, answering directly to the attorney general, right? Even that judge, by and large, in a USA Today study a year ago, showed that it was a comprehensive study. The large majority of people who get caught and put in prison, a judge will give them $10 fine, and will let them out of prison and will deport them. There's no judge really that feels like they need to keep an undocumented immigrant in prison for more than what they've already been in prison waiting for their case to be heard. Again, why? Is because we used to agree that while maybe we can't have undocumented immigrants keep coming to the US, and we argue about that all the time, virtually nobody but the hardest of hardcore would think of these undocumented immigrants as criminals, right? And that is what Trump did. He moved the Overton window, so to speak, to a place where now people I know who call themselves moderates, who think they're moderates, think of undocumented immigrants as law-breaking criminals. And that is neither practically true, nor of course, ethically true.
Yeah.
Great point. Great point. And the repetition and importance of words, I think how we think and how we consistently send out a message may have a great influence on how people develop their thinking patterns. Dana, you wanted to step in.
Yes, on top of what Razvan has been saying, from a legal point of view, what do you do if you break the law, as misdemeanor as that may be considered, for reasons such as you're under duress, you're fleeing violence, you're fleeing from something? That adds an extra layer of unfairness in thinking of these people as criminals. And the example I like to give is, what if some parent had a father had their son in their car, and they were driving their son to a hospital, and the son is bleeding in the back, and you're trying to pass through an intersection where there's a broken red light that's only on red. You cannot pass through that intersection because this neighborhood has never taken the time to fix that light. It's eternally red. Yet your child is bleeding in the back, and you need to get on the hospital that's on the other side of the intersection. What do you do, and what type of guilt do we assign to you if you make the decision to drive through an intersection with a broken light that has never been fixed? Obviously, what I'm driving at here, pun intended, is the fact that that eternally broken light is our system of immigration laws. It's eternally on red, so to speak, because it doesn't provide enough legal avenues for that father to cross that intersection. The intersection is the border. The son bleeding in the back is the reason why you fled your country. The hospital waiting for you on the other side is what you're looking for, is the magnet that draws you to the other side, right? So in that particular situation, who calls themselves human wouldn't agree that that's a justifiable crossing? You have to do it. And many of us would say, well, if we wanted to make that crossing, red, we should fix that light so that it's not eternally red. It would allow some people in based on certain criteria. But right now, that's exactly what we're looking at the border, especially with the Romanian-Mexico new policies that's not even letting you come in at the legal point of entry to knock and say, I want asylum. That is over. You can no longer get into the United States for a legal point of entry that way. You have to remain in Mexico. And let me not get started on the huge lines that you get into in the Romanian-Mexico policy, and the deprivation of safety and access to counsel and all the other problems associated with it. So basically, that's interposes on top of what Razvan already said. There's justification for why people come here. And I want to talk a little bit about the magnet that I'm talking about and why maybe Republicans have traditionally been tolerant of even undocumented immigrants. The truth is we have a magnet inside the United States. The magnet is called demand for low-skilled labor as well as high-skilled labor. But let's focus on the low-skilled labor. If we have that demand here, and if the Ecuadorian client knows from their cousin that there are jobs here in the United States and they abound, they're in farms, golf courses, landscaping, construction, restaurants, dishwashing, etc. That news tends to spread. That's the magnet that we have. Unfortunately, we do not have a visa system that equals that magnet. We are not giving enough legal avenues for people to get drawn to that magnet in a legal way. So we have the magnet, but we don't have the way for people to come here legally. Now, the Republicans who own these, some of these farms and businesses who need some of this labor have been tolerant of it because they need the labor. Quite frankly, this country needs way much more labor, especially at the low skill level, than the number of visas that we've created to permit it to enter. So that's where we are right now. And the last immigration reform was done in 1996. Actually, the biggest one was done in 86, and then in 96 with a little bit of tweaks. But basically, since 96, we haven't really taken a second look at our immigration laws, and we've kicked the can down the road over and over again. And now we're in a situation where we're using a broken system of laws as weapons against these immigrants.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd also like to add on Dana's comment that it's important to address the villainization of populations, because when we do get immigration reform, that villainization can undermine reform. It goes, if you think of the European Union, right, Brexit, driven a lot by the villainization of people who are attracted perhaps to the UK for the jobs. They had access. There are open borders there, but then they get removed because people get angry. There are people there who are villainizing others. And so it's that triangle, and the current administration here in the US knows how to use it very well. Farage knows how to use it in the UK very well. It's really very dangerous, and it's important for everyone to recognize that these people are people. Most of our families have been immigrants, and it's just really important to step outside of that triangle. And I think the combination of laws and, again, impartial reporting and just the awareness of this triangle can help us to do that, because when reform comes, we want to be able to take advantage of it.
Great points, all of you. So besides the fact that there is a need for reform, I'm also hearing from all of you that there is a media representation of immigrants, documented and undocumented, which is unfavorable for immigrants. And I think that plays an important role also in how the population looks at immigrants and understands the process of immigration in itself. What can you say about that?
Well, I'm a journalist, so I am not about to go all out on the media, because the question is always which media. We're not all the same. The stories out there are very diverse. Let me make a short detour. The population of undocumented immigrants and immigrants in general, but undocumented immigrants in particular, is very diverse. And that is something that doesn't often come through in the media, which focuses very much on Mexicans, and the Central American countries, the 3 countries in Central America that are now providing the bulk of undocumented immigrants. But the truth is that there's many undocumented immigrants living in America who are white. Many, in fact, are Canadian, simply because it is very easy as a Canadian to come to the US to get a job, and then to let your visa that you came in on, which was not a work visa, lapse. You are white, generally. You speak English as a native. You look the part, you act the part, and nobody wonders whether you're here illegally. I like to tell my students, anyone here in this room right now, including myself, could be an undocumented immigrant and you would not know it. Because up until a few years ago, if you had an ID that you got 20 years ago, and almost 2/3 of undocumented immigrants in America have been in America for more than 10 years. 10 years ago, it was very easy in a number of states to just walk into your DMV and ask for an ID. And you would give them a phone bill with your address and they would give you that. And based on that, you could get a lot of other paperwork, including social security number, and you would get a job. And nobody, and on the strength of that job, you would get another job and another job. And there's college professors and there's engineers and there's doctors right now who are undocumented, but nobody really knows. We have every now and then a coming out in the media from somebody, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, right? Very famous case, or a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer who say, you know what, I'm undocumented. That case with so many people, but we don't care about them because they are doctors and lawyers and college professors, fluent in English, they're white. So don't tell me there's no racial animus in the enforcement of immigration law when they primarily go after the what we now call essential workers in the fields and in the kitchens of America, right? And even those, you don't really see a lot of workplace raids, immigration raids. You get one every now and then, it gets a lot of publicity. You know who's employing them. But the problem is, as Dana mentioned, those who employ them are often Chamber of Commerce members, high-ranking members of the Republican Party in their own state. And it wouldn't do to do a raid on a factory that employs thousands of undocumented immigrants, right? Nobody in the Republican Party in that state would be happy about that. So what they do is they take pot shots. They reach for the, for the low branches. They make life miserable for people at the border because that's where it's easiest to get them. They make life miserable for families because they haven't yet been employed. They haven't yet had the chance to, to find their way. They don't make life hard for college professors or doctors or employees of Republican, farms and restaurants. And that, if you want to go after undocumented immigrants, I think that's a huge mistake. It's unethical. But at least then show me that you're doing it in a manner that is fair. And they're not. They're not. It's clear that they go after Latin Americans who look the part, who can be villainized easily. Because when you take out a doctor, a white doctor who's been at Boston, Children's Hospital for the past 20 years, you take him out in cuffs with 5 lawyers behind him, that is a whole different image than some poor, peasant from the high hills of Guatemala, who nobody cares about in this country. That is a huge problem when it comes to the enforcement of immigration. No matter how good the laws are, if this is how you enforce them, pardon me if I suspect that racism plays a big part in how you do things.
You are pointing on a system that would be non-hypocritical, right? Sure. Which it's an ideal, and we are pretty far from it, as we can hear from all of you. I would like to move to another topic that was on our list for today, and that is in relation to, and I want to ask Dana about this, in relation to Romanians and immigration into the US. where are we today? What's available for those who would like to move to U.S.?
Sure. So Romanians, Eastern Europeans in general, obviously they're not, contiguous. They don't have contiguous territory to that of the United States. So we're not going to talk as much about border crossings. Although I do want to caution everyone that there are Romanian citizens that have been known to cross illegally the Mexican border. So that's not beyond the purview of even Eastern Europeans to fly to Mexico and then cross. It's an unfortunate choice that gets made for whatever reasons, but it exists. There's also white or Eastern European nationals who choose to come here and then for whatever reason, their status expires. So we count a lot of folks undocumented that way from the Romanian and Eastern European communities. Both ways, either border crossing illegally or else flying in and letting their visa expire or just falling off the wagon, like I said. There's a lot of ways to fall off the wagon and not be able to get back in it. And I am sorry to report, but right now, as we speak, I have Romanian citizens in detention centers at ICE that I am representing, and it is an unfortunate reality. And a lot of them are fathers and mothers of young kids who are detained and kept away from their kids. And that's just a very hard part of what I'm doing day to day. But about Romanians in general, there's been a big group of them that came here during communism, so before 1989, via refugee or asylee status. Then there's folks who came after the 1990 in diversity visa lottery status, which, by the way, brings me back to it used to be easy because right now the diversity visa lottery, by the way, has been prohibited during the COVID-19 crisis. And if it weren't for a court decision, okay, to say you cannot prohibit it, it would be prohibited today. So let's just be thankful for the way the rule of law still functions in this country to allow people to avail themselves of diversity visa lottery, a congressionally mandated program that allows 50,000 folks per year to come to this country. So a lot of Romanians came here with diversity visa lottery, and hopefully they'll continue to be able to come. Then there's the H-1B track for Romanians. So anybody who's a professional, holds at least a bachelor's degree, and has a job offer from an American employer with all the issues associated with that visa. Namely, there's just not enough of those visas around for as many professionals as this economy needs. Even during COVID-19, there's need for more professionals than the 65,000 to 85,000 visas per year that we give. Then I want to point out something available to Romanians that not many Romanians know about is the E2 visa. Due to the bilateral investment treaty between the US and Romania, people who have at least, let's say, $100,000 in their own capital and agree to invest it here in the United States and create locally, those people could get an E2 visa. And there's some Romanians who have utilized this avenue to immigrate. I would say that is more advisable now due to the scarcity of the work visas and due to all the other tightening legal avenues. Now, as far as Romanians are concerned, in detention centers, I just wanted to make a point about that. There's a few things that we should know about detention conditions in this country. And just because we're called immigration and social justice, we should all know that right now we're dealing with a private prison system of detention, okay? And most of the ICE detention centers are private prisons. Because they're private and they have profit as a motive, they are incentivized to cut costs, including care, medical care, food, basic necessities. I mean, I'm sure you all heard about the recent scandal at the Georgia-based ICE detention center where women were complaining of being treated by not even a licensed OBGYN who was performing hysterectomies without consent from the patient. I have personally verified that to be an accurate account from clients that I have in that center. And it just, that's the type of stuff that bothers me and should bother a lot of people in this country. And another thing that I want to state, specifically to Romanians, so that we all know that this impacts us all, okay? If you have a deportation order and you end up in one of these centers, you are likely to be held there for 2 to 3 to even more months beyond the time when you're supposed to be deported, which is, we all have to sit back and think, why? You have a judge-ordered deportation and you're not fighting it. You just want to actually go back to Romania at this point. But you're going to be held in custody for 3 more months at the very least, until they gear up and they put you on a plane, etc. During these 3 months, you're subjected to subprime detention conditions that even they're subprime to you, and even if the food is awful, the medical care is awful and everything, yet those subpar detention conditions come to a steep price to US taxpayers. So I want to raise awareness about this issue so that perhaps that's another part of the practices that need the reform. There should be no reason why a judge order shouldn't be more promptly enforced. Why would you subject people that you already know you're going to deport to additional detention, additional unnecessary detention, and subject them to all these conditions, including the OBGYN, the fake OBGYN doctor who was performing hysterectomies? I mean, that is just, it shouldn't be done. And that type of practice should be looked at and completely eliminated. I would make a rule that if you have a deportation order and if you're not contesting it and you want to go back to your country, there should be no excuse why this cannot be done in 1 month or less. So, and obviously there's many other abuses that we need to take a look at, because there are abuses. And I've made a habit of reporting on my, I'm not a journalist, I'm a lawyer, but I do want to report. When I report, I report something that's not only on the news, but it's from my personal experience. I actually have a client who has gone through this, and it happens to also be reflected in the media. But I'm not reporting something that I cannot verify myself, because there's so much disinformation out there. And since we're at the chapter of disinformation, it literally bothers me how much of it there is when it comes to the myths that we apply to vilify immigrants. One such myth is that they come here to live on welfare. Right. Well, wait a minute. The law, the welfare law, so to speak, always requires that you be at least a green card holder plus 5 years of residence on top of having that green card before you could tap into any type of welfare means-tested benefits in this country. So you're not talking about undocumented, because the undocumented by definition cannot present a green card and show 5 years of residence on top of it. So that's just a lie. And it's such a big lie that based on that lie, I'm going to give you a tip from my own practice. Based on that lie, the federal government came up with an entire form called I-944, public charge form. That's 18 pages long, I kid you not. That gets imposed on every single new immigrant, undocumented or not, who's soliciting any type of benefit, but like a visa or like a green card from immigration. They have to fill out 18-page long form to document that they've never taken advantage of any public means tested benefits such as welfare, and to detail all their bank accounts, all their credit history, all their assets, all their liabilities, so that they could convince the US government that they're not now a burden on the state, nor will they ever be foreseeably in the future. Now, I've been filling out these 18-page long forms since February 24, when they went into effect. Ask me how many immigrants have indicated that they have used public benefits. How many? I'll tell you how many. And I do a lot, by the way. Every single day, I do like at least a few of these forms. Zero. Zero. Why? Because the law forbids them to, okay? It would take some chutzpah to walk in there and say, I have a green card, let me show you a fake one and get on welfare. And the attitude, that's just not the attitude of the immigrant. They don't come here they don't even know about the welfare office. They have no idea where it is, how it works, and they would never commit illegalities. They are excited to be here and do everything they're supposed to. So based on fake ideologies, we're building all these extra forms and extra obstacles in the way of immigrants, and we're making it that much harder. Speaking of that form that I talked to you about, obviously there was litigation on it because people sued, and one court blocked it, another court of appeals in our region said, no, you know what, let it go forward. So right now we're back at let it go forward. But all this time, I have yet to encounter one immigrant that has unlawfully been on welfare.
Great points. To add to that, my experience in my profession is working with people who don't have access to healthcare. And that brings, a lot of other, series of problems because even if they become sick, they are afraid to go to the hospital or access any public health care form because they fear deportation. And, if we look from a social justice point of view, not have access to basic healthcare system as a human being, regardless of being, having documents or not, we are in really serious trouble. And Rebecca, if you want to add anything on this.
Oh, this hits so hard on the triangle, right? So the whole idea of welfare is to help people in need. And then we get angry that we're helping people in need or not in the case of new applicants, right? So we have a lot of people who are suffering in the United States, whether they're citizens, immigrants, or undocumented people. And it doesn't jive with this idea that America is the land of opportunity, right? So we have to create this narrative, America's the hero. We have to create this narrative where these people who are suffering must deserve it. And they either deserve it for various reasons. They've come into the country illegally. They don't deserve help. Or they don't work hard. They're lazy. They don't deserve help. So we create this narrative so America can stay the hero in our minds. And it's dangerous because there's people who are absolutely good people. Most people are absolutely good people, right? And they're doing what they can do and they need help, whether it's because they're part of a population that's been consistently deprived in the US, or whether a matter of circumstance, they haven't had the best opportunities or have had to overcome crisis. But the fact that we can't say collectively that, you know what, if you don't have money, you still deserve to live and still deserve healthcare, that's a problem. That we create this narrative that says, well, maybe you can't afford healthcare, but there's a reason why. Maybe you didn't do what you needed to do. And that's just wrong. And that's using the triangle. And it gets people in trouble. So we have to get beyond that for sure.
Yeah, I would like to jump in to add to your healthcare, because if we have viewers that are they're concerned about how healthcare coverage interacts with that public charge
Mhm.
ground to block their benefits, I want to say this. Um, they've been put in a pickle, and deliberately. On the one hand, by law, they're supposed to have health insurance. That very form, the 18-page long form that the government came up with, asks there, show us that you have health care coverage. On the other hand, health care coverage rarely gets given to people without a social security number. That's one. And two, if you do have a social security number and you want health care coverage and you have low income, you might be eligible for some sort of low income type of health coverage, such as Husky program in Connecticut. I don't know what it is called in your state. Then they're all of a sudden concerned that it's going to count against them come green card time, because are they going to be looked at as a burden on the state? And they're right to be concerned like that, because of that's the way the government wants them to be concerned these days. But I would say is this is what I tell my clients. Look, get yourself health insurance. If this is what the state offers you, take it. We'll deal with the consequence later at green card level. And I'm willing to fight for these people. So at the time of the green card, if I, as much as hear an officer comment on how having them availing themselves of the availability of healthcare coverage in their state should count against their green card, I'm not going to be very happy as a lawyer with that. And I'm going to let the officer know. So I'm going to fight for those clients, because I believe eventually it's going to go back. Eventually, there's going to be litigation in the court. This is so inherently unfair that somewhere in some court, this is going to be declared unconstitutional. It's probably on its way to be declared unconstitutional. So at least during, I've seen a bunch of injunctions federally across the nation. I believe there's one that currently says, you know what, during COVID-19, anybody who avails themselves of healthcare coverage in their state, no matter how provided, it's good. You cannot be held against your green card. So that's what I would say to people. Don't worry for now. Get your healthcare. We'll figure out the fight later.
Excellent point. And that tells us even more that we need available counsel for those in need. Because if we don't have it, then you imagine people don't know what to do. They feel confused or afraid. And I think, having someone like you, it's crucial in moments like this for someone in need. Well, I think we are, past our time almost. I would like to take a look at the questions here or comments and see if it's anything that that it's addressed to you or you would like to respond to. All right. So we have comments, not so many questions so far. Okay, let's see here. Michael Ovidiu Dediu is telling us that the anti-immigrant ideology to limit immigration because they take away American jobs was a democratic stance in the 1980s. The Republicans stood for immigrant economic rights. When the Republicans took the anti-immigrant ideology as a populist stance, there was no one left to speak for the immigrants except for activists, lawyers.
That's certainly true in so many ways. If you listen to Bernie Sanders, right, beacon of American progressivism, he started by not being very open to immigration because he came from the old school union wing of the left, which was very suspicious towards undocumented labor. Of course, some would be a little more sophisticated about it and talk about how it's the employers who are not. It's the lack of a minimum wage and the unscrupulous employers who are providing for this unfair competition between unionized American citizens, American workers, and undocumented workers. It's not actually the fault of the undocumented workers, but that point was not raised necessarily by every leftist politician looking for votes. So that's absolutely correct that a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment used to come from the left on behalf of American workers who felt threatened by immigrants. But then, as we all know, the votes, the electorates switched, and the Republicans started making bank on appealing to the white working class worker in America and playing on their fears of unfair competition. And the Democrats were also moved away from that stance, partly by the demise of the unions and their political power, but also by the rise of progressive politics as well. So yes, in the past, the Democrats have had plenty of sins, and they still do. But as we stand now, they're a lot more immigrant friendly than the Republicans are. I hope that will change for the sake of the Republican soul, as they speak. Yeah.
Thank you, Razvan. One more comment here from Sherban Andrei Dinulescu. Nobody's demonizing immigrants, but we do want a secured border so MS-13 and drugs do not pour in. And those cages were put in place by Obama.
So I'm going to take that one. Obama, I was an immigration lawyer during Obama as well. And yes, we had to fight unfair immigration practices during his presidency as well. I didn't think he was particularly progressive on the issue either, but there can be no comparison, absolutely no comparison between the state of affairs in immigration law during Obama with what's going on right now. Yes, there's huge demonizing of immigrants, and I am 75% of the American public agreeing on immigration reform tells us something. It tells us this is not Democrats care, Republicans don't care, or vice versa. I think this is an American problem. Immigration reform is an American problem, and border security, I believe it's part of it. Just has to be done humanely, because right now, what's going on, it's done in such a way that it induces a whole lot more deaths by people trying to cross the borders than it should be. A whole lot more detention and mass incarceration than it should be. A whole lot less rights for asylum seekers than it used to be the case. And I'm not excusing either president, not even Obama. I don't think he did well in the policies that he had, for whatever reasons that he tried to jockey around, to gain more bipartisan support. I didn't think his was good either, but what's going on right now is unprecedented. For my 15 years of practice in immigration law, I've never seen this level of persecution, this level of abuses of human rights against immigrants. And, you have to know a person affected, just even at least one person, to understand what's going on. Never mind the media. If you don't believe in the media, just find out from the grapevine. Get out there and ask any one of these communities. And for God's sake, just in Connecticut, in Hartford, Connecticut, there have been rallies. There have been people sleeping in tents outside of the federal district court to prevent people's detention and deportation that were unfairly done. For example, there was a person that was detained, although her so-called crime was pardoned by the state of Connecticut, but guess what? ICE did not recognize Connecticut pardons. ICE picked and chose which pardons they recognize. Illinois, yeah. Connecticut, no. How is that fair? And there were people in tents outside of the court to express their outrage at this. There were people protesting in front of the federal building to prevent the deportation of their own parents, who have been US citizens, who have undocumented parents, who for 25 years have been in this country undocumented and unable to legalize, because of the anachronistic system of laws that we have. And they were chaining themselves basically in front of the courthouse. Look at that stuff. Get out of your bubble and look at your neighbors. Ask your Latino population. They know someone who has suffered through this. In literally every week we hear of cases of people picked from courthouses due to the new policy that immigrants could be picked up based on a mere arrest. They don't have to be proven guilty. They are not given the opportunity to defend themselves in the criminal court. They just get picked up as soon as the Connecticut police picks them up or charges them with a crime. And then ICE comes and deports them before they get to prove their innocence, or better yet, before the state gets to prove their guilt. Okay, so then there's all these other policies, even at the Connecticut state level, and probably in your states as well. I'm imagining Massachusetts. We have a new law called the Trust Act that prevents local law enforcement from basically doing ICE's job and picking up people solely based on immigration, on an outstanding immigration order, deportation order. That's not the local police's job, that's ICE's job. Yet we've had instances, including myself, I've had instances of local police violating that law and picking someone up because they speak Spanish, or they don't belong in that neighborhood, and then checking to see and seeing a deportation order. They have no other criminal charges, just a deportation order. They call up ICE, and all of a sudden ICE picks this person up. Now that's illegal in Connecticut. Okay, so
yeah, we tend to
all
pick
around
and
you.
choose. We tend to pick and choose which laws are, which laws, if you break them, you're a criminal, and which laws, if you break them, you're just smart, right? Paying your taxes is optional, but committing a federal misdemeanor is the world's worst crime. Let me share one quick anecdote that shows, I think, very well what this administration actually means when people say, oh, they don't hate immigrants, they just dislike undocumented immigrants. That's not really true. They've gone after legal immigration in so many ways. And let me share with you one way in which they've gone after legal immigration that actually didn't work out because of the Supreme Court. But towards the beginning of the Trump administration, the government ended up in court in front of the Supreme Court, and they were arguing something about immigration. And the government's attorney was arguing that if you are a naturalized immigrant, so mind you, we're not talking undocumented immigrant, we're talking the people who are watching us right now, documented immigrants, naturalized American citizens. If while you were not the citizen, when you were on a green card legally, you have committed any infraction whatsoever, the government wanted the right to take away your citizenship. Because as we all know, on the citizenship form, there's a question that says, have you ever broken a law, right? And this goes to my comment earlier about how selective we are about laws, right? So the government put forward what they consider to be a common sense proposition. Listen, the form says, have you ever committed a crime? If you check no, as of course everybody checks no, right? And we discover 40 years later that you broke a law while you were on a green card, we can take away your citizenship, which would have been a Damocles' sword over the head of every single immigrant ever in America, including, again, those who watch us, because who hasn't broken a law? I go out to pick up my daughter from school, and in the span of half an hour, I probably break four or five laws, traffic laws, right? So Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice of the US, incredulously asked the lawyer for the government, do you mean to say that if I'm a naturalized American and you somehow discover that 10 years ago, before I was a citizen, I broke the speeding, the law in a state, I drove 10 miles above the speed limit, and you find out, you have maybe footage or a police report, you mean to say that you want to be able to take away my citizenship? And the government's lawyer said yes. And I quote, direct quote from Justice Roberts, he said, that's ridiculous. But and of course they did not give the government that power, but it shows you From the very beginning, year one of the Trump administration, the government wanted to be able to denaturalize any one of you people watching us, including myself, if they can, any immigrant, if they can prove that you've committed the slightest infraction, that includes jaywalking, it includes anything, right? A traffic ticket, you can be denaturalized. Imagine what kind of power they want over immigrants. What kind of power do you have when with like this, you can denaturalize the hundreds of millions of Americans, the tens of millions of Americans who are immigrants here. That's what they want. They're not just going after undocumented immigrants. Dana can tell you about probably dozens of measures that are aimed at documented immigrants, legal immigrants, naturalized citizens, not just undocumented immigrants. You're not safe with this administration if you are a naturalized American. The Muslim ban, which was the first anti-immigrant thing that Trump put in when he came to power, caught green carders as well. Green carders who had assumed they were as good as American immigrants, except they can't vote and they can't be elected. Guess what? They were turned away at the border, right? Legal immigrants to the United States, legal resident aliens, they were denied entry. So don't tell me it's only undocumented immigrants because they broke the law. No, it's all of us, immigrants, all of us. There's a deep anti-immigrant animus.
So it's
I
important.
wanna jump in and say that there's an actual name to what Razvan was talking about. It's called Operation Janus.
Mhm.
It's from the Roman god Janus with two faces, because of course immigrants have two faces, right? And a hidden one that we never knew about, and the official one. And so Operation Janus is like extra taxpayers' money to paid for fraud units, okay, for specifically purposed fraud units to investigate immigrants like all of us, to see if there's been any lie in your past. And this was going to open the floodgates to inquire about everything else. I mean, did you say the right? It goes all the way back with how you obtain your citizenship. Might you have lied at the time when you first obtained asylum in 1980? I mean, that's part of your naturalization journey. Might you have lied later on when you obtain your green card? I mean, that's also part. Might you have lied later when you obtain citizenship? So it's, where's the limits? It's a slippery slope. If you open the floodgates, then nothing is guaranteed. No application could be laid to rest. Now you're a citizen. And so Operation Janus is an actual thing. You could Google it and you could see how they set it up. And you know, the Supreme Court may have withstood one attempt, but the way this administration has worked is you could come back with another one and see if it passes muster with the new Supreme Court. So that's, I'm just gonna leave that right there.
Yeah, great.
And I wanted to say really quickly, the drugs portion of the question, the drugs crossing the border. Our opiate crisis right now perhaps has been impacted by some drugs crossing the border, but more so impacted by big pharma within the US and within the pharmaceutical companies. So again, it's this constant villainizing of the other that we're seeing, and we're not looking at ourselves.
I would like to read a recommendation from Ramona Dumitrescu, which I think will end our session on a positive note. She's recommending, in order to change the image of immigrants, to show positive examples, stories, outstanding immigrant stories that contributed to the American society. And I take that as a great recommendation, and I hope Archer, together with other organizations, may organize something like this in the future, because that will help changing the image.
Mihaela, I think that's a great comment, and I'm really happy someone made it, because that's exactly what we're preparing to do from Connecticut through a nonprofit called Connecticut Immigrant and Refugee Coalition. We're preparing a major video campaign that highlights a few very, very established, very accomplished immigrants from the Connecticut society to showcase the economic, political, social contributions that immigrants have to society. There's absolutely way more contributions than any downsides to immigration, and that has been a bipartisan staple for a long, long time. I mean, that's who we are. It's in our DNA as Americans.
I
So
absolutely
absolutely,
agree. Yeah.
coming up soon.
Yeah. Well, we are closing our incredible conference today. If more, I cannot see anything else right now that it's a question per se, but if more questions are coming, I'm going to ask you if you wish to respond to them. So feel free to continue to ask, to read, watch the video again, share it with friends and family. I think it's such an important topic. It's crucial. We are before the election. The more we know, the better we choose. And in name of Archer, I thank you all, not only for the information provided, for the expertise you were so gracefully shared with us, but also for your passion. And I cannot say more than that. And thank you. And hopefully we'll organize something else in the future. So goodbye, everyone, and please continue to listen, share, and ask questions if you wish.
Thank you, Mihaela.
Thank you.
Thank you.